They have transformed a landscape in Ethiopia that was previously considered a basket case. That is incredible.
This didn't begin with seeds or saplings or science labs. It began with silence, a quiet sweep of desert wind across cracked hills. The land was dead, no roots, no rain, no hope. Then something changed.
The success of the restoration that we've seen in Ethiopia is a classic example of collaborative effort.
Forests began to return, not through planting, but through memory, buried roots, whispering back to life. Streams flowed again, springs bubbled up, and entire valleys turned green.
A remarkable transformation is taking place in Ethiopia's highlands, back to healthy, productive lands once again.
No technology, no miracle, just people who listened, and nature that remembered. In one of Earth's harshest landscapes, something impossible was happening, and the world wasn't watching until now. The Forgotten Garden of Africa. Before it was a land of dust and famine, Ethiopia was a place of rivers, forests, and fertile abundance. A land known to ancient civilizations as lush, sacred, and self-sustaining. Historians and elders speak of a time when thick canopies covered its mountains and deep springs bubbled year-round in the valleys. Over 60% of the country was once covered in forests, but that image now feels like a forgotten myth. The shift didn't happen overnight. It crept in through generations as populations grew and pressures mounted. Colonial influence, war, and agricultural expansion. Forests for fuel, farmland, and timber. Trees fell, the rain stopped. The soil thinned and cracked. By the mid-20th century, Ethiopia had already lost more than half its forests. By 1982, only 3% of forest cover remained. Without trees, the land couldn't hold moisture. Rivers disappeared. The wind carried away what little topsoil remained. And so, the Garden of Africa began to die. Yet buried in this decay were hints of resilience. Tiny root systems beneath the dust. Memories locked in the land. While the world saw only a desert, something ancient was waiting underneath, not to be planted, but to be remembered, revealed, and reborn. Famine, drought, and collapse. The world remembers Ethiopia for one image, the famine of the 1980s. Skeleton-thin children, endless lines for grain. Dust-choked skies above a starving land.
By that time, thousands of people, perhaps even millions of people, may have died.
But what caused this catastrophe wasn't just bad luck or distant drought. It was something older, deeper. Decades of deforestation and erosion that left the land gasping. Without forests, Ethiopia's delicate ecological balance is shattered. The rain stopped falling where it once soaked the ground. Streams turned into scars in the soil. Crops withered before harvest, and the people whose survival depended entirely on what they could grow had nothing left. Between 1983 and 1985, over 1 million people died. The famine wasn't just a humanitarian disaster, it was a national collapse. It exposed how dangerously fragile the land had become. Generations of forest clearing had left Ethiopia defenseless against climate extremes, and the deserts grew larger, faster. In the highlands, once blanketed in green, the hills began to echo. Wind, not birdsong. Sand, not crops. Farmers abandoned their fields. Livestock wandered and died. But through the devastation, some communities began to ask hard questions. Not about aid or handouts, but about healing. Could the land recover? Could the rivers return? Could the forests somehow grow again? The answers were waiting, but they wouldn't come from outside. They had to come from within. An ancient land rethinks the future. In the shadow of tragedy, something unexpected began to stir. Not from governments or global organizations, but from the ground up. In villages across the Ethiopian highlands, people began to talk, not of fleeing, but of staying, of rebuilding, of reimagining what their land could be. That deep memory wasn't gone. It was simply buried beneath years of survival. So, communities turned inward. They began walking the same lands their ancestors once farmed and asked, what if we try again, but differently this time? The first steps weren't grand. Farmers gathered under trees that hadn't been cut yet. Elders remembered how water once moved across hills. And slowly, a vision took shape. One rooted not in modern machinery, but in cooperation. They started drawing maps, not for roads, but for water. They studied how rain used to flow, where springs once emerged, and how erosion had stolen their soil. They spoke to experts not to be told what to do, but to learn how to make decisions themselves. And once they decided, they didn't wait. They picked up tools, not for protest or survival, but for creation. Ethiopia's recovery didn't begin with a policy. It began with a shovel. Terraces and trenches, engineering with the earth. If you walk through the highlands of Ethiopia today, you'll see them. Long lines carved into the hillsides. Stone walls, trenches, earth shaped by hand. Not to destroy, but to heal. These aren't relics of ancient engineering. They're the signs of a modern awakening. Land reshaped by communities who finally understood that water, not soil, was their most precious resource. To restore what was lost, farmers needed to stop losing water. So they built terraces, wide sloping platforms that catch rain and stop it from rushing away. They dug check dams in dry gullies to trap runoff. They constructed percolation ponds to let water slowly sink into the earth. And they raised earthen barriers, called bunds, across the land, each one anchoring moisture where it once vanished. No machines, no contractors, just communities moving rock, stacking stone, hauling soil. It's estimated that across Ethiopia, over 90 million tons of earth have been shifted by hand. But this wasn't just labor. It was a strategy. Each terrace, each trench, was placed according to how the rain used to move. The work didn't just slow erosion, it changed the direction of life. Little by little, green began to return. Crops held firm. Seeds sprouted. And what was once a slope of dust became a stairway for water and hope. Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you. The hills that caught the rain. High above the valleys where the sun beats hardest and the soil is driest, Ethiopia's upper slopes once looked like a dead zone. Nothing grew. Wind stripped the land bare. But it was here, on the steepest, most degraded hills, that the quiet revolution took its boldest steps. The solution began with control. For generations, livestock had grazed freely, eating every green shoot before it could take root. Hooves pounded the soil into dust. So, communities made a difficult choice. They fenced these areas off. Grazing would stop. The land would rest. It didn't seem like much at first. Dry shrubs, yellow grass. But beneath that surface, something was waiting. As livestock were rotated and feed was carried by hand from greener zones, nature began to respond. Tiny blades of grass pushed through. Shrubs thickened. Moisture lingered longer in the mornings. Then came the insects. Then the birds. Gullies that once sliced down the mountains were treated with rock dams, slowing water and allowing sediment to build. With time, those scars healed. These weren't isolated efforts. They were part of a larger, layered plan. Valley bottoms for irrigation, middle slopes for crops, upper slopes for regeneration. The result? A landscape that no longer lost the rain, but caught it, held it, and let it grow roots. Rivers that forgot how to flow. There were rivers in Ethiopia that people had forgotten. Older generations spoke of them like myths. Streams that once danced through valleys, bubbling springs that fed entire villages. But for decades, these waterways were gone, eaten by drought, buried under silence. The only evidence left was dry riverbeds, twisted like scars across the land. But even silence can be broken. The key wasn't to force the rivers back, but to slow them down when they came. During the rainy season, sudden floods would rush through the valleys, tearing away what little soil remained. So communities began building small rock dams, low and wide, across dry channels. These humble structures weren't flashy, just rows of stones stacked to interrupt the flow, but the effect was immediate. Water slowed, sediment settled, moisture seeped into the banks. Seeds, once carried by wind, found a place to take hold. In just a few months, green appeared along the edges. In a year, the riverbed was alive again, not rushing, but lingering, nurturing. And this was no isolated miracle. Across Ethiopia, hundreds of rivers and streams followed the same pattern. The same whisper came back to life. With every dam and trench, the water was learning to stay, and the land was learning to remember. The forest that was already there. In a remote stretch of southern Ethiopia, something extraordinary happened. A dense forest rose where there had been nothing but barren scrub. No seedlings were planted, no saplings, no nurseries or irrigation pipes. Yet today, over 2,700 hectares stand green and growing. How? The answer lies beneath the surface. This wasn't a planting project, it was a revelation, a reawakening of what was already there. The method is called FMNR, Farmer Managed Natural Regeneration, and it began with a simple realization. Even in the driest lands, trees may not be dead, only hidden. Beneath the dry ground, many tree stumps and root systems had survived. They hadn't vanished. They had simply been cut back again and again by human hands and hungry goats. But left alone, and with the right care, they could grow again, fast. The idea was pioneered by Rinaudo in Niger. He discovered that if you prune the right stems from these hardy root systems and protect them from grazing, the remaining shoots become strong trunks, in time, full trees. In Humbo, 7 communities embraced this method. They stopped cutting. They protected what looked like weeds, and slowly, those shrubs rose into canopies. The forest, it turned out, had never really died. It had just been waiting for someone to stop and listen. Tony's simple secret to reforestation. Rinaudo didn't set out to change the world. He just wanted to help.
In a beautiful part of Australia, so lovely forested hills, mountain streams and fertile agricultural land.
Living in Niger during the devastating droughts of the 1980s, he kept planting trees, tens of thousands of them, but almost all died. The desert was too strong. The sun is too brutal. Until one day, while walking along a dusty road, he noticed something strange. What looked like a weed was a tree stump, alive, rooted, and desperately trying to grow. That moment changed everything. Instead of planting new trees, he began encouraging farmers to work with what they already had. The technique became known as FMNR. It required no money, no machines, no imported seeds, just a knife, some patience, and a change in mindset. When a bushy stump pushes out dozens of weak stems, Tony teaches farmers to cut back all but the strongest 3 or 4. That reduces competition and sends energy to the chosen stems. They grow faster, stronger. In months, they resemble young trees. In a few years, they're full-grown. And because the roots are already deep, sometimes over 30 meters, they don't struggle like new plants. They bring water and nutrients up from deep underground. It's embarrassingly simple, as Tony says, but it works again and again, all across Africa. 13 springs, 6 flowing all year. In the mountains near Humbo, there were once 13 natural springs. All had dried up. Locals remembered them as places where children played and women gathered water. But for years, they were nothing more than dusty indentations in the hillsides. No one expected them to return. But then the trees did. As FMNR took hold and forests grew again, something remarkable happened underground. The soil, now shaded by leaves and protected by roots, began to retain moisture. Rainfall no longer raced across the surface. It stayed, it sank, it quietly rebuilt the water table. And then, one by one, the springs returned. Today, 6 of those 13 springs now flow all year round. Even during the dry season, they bubble with cold, clean water. The villagers didn't dig new wells. They didn't bring in pumps. They simply gave nature the chance to repair itself. With water flowing again, everything changed. Irrigation expanded. Fields grew. Women walked less. Children returned to school. The return of water isn't just a technical victory. It's a resurrection, a reminder that beneath even the driest land, life waits for roots, for rain, and for a reason to rise. From scarcity to abundance, what the world can learn. What happened in Ethiopia wasn't a miracle. It was a choice, a slow, steady decision by ordinary people to believe their land could live again. No foreign blueprints, no billion-dollar contracts, just farmers, elders, and communities working with ancient knowledge, local labor, and modern insight. The results are undeniable. Over 43,000 hectares have been restored. Rivers flowing where dust once settled, forests reborn without planting. More than 85% of farmers report higher yields. 76% have increased income. And the soil, once dead, now carries life, not just for plants, but for generations. The key wasn't planting, it was patience. In a world obsessed with quick fixes and flashy solutions, Ethiopia's quiet revolution reminds us that change begins in silence, in forgotten stumps, in hands that choose to dig, not destroy. And this story isn't Ethiopia's alone. Across the Sahel, FMNR is spreading. Countries once thought doomed to desertification are seeing green again. The method is cheap, scalable, built for survival. In a time of climate collapse, Ethiopia teaches us nature doesn't need reinvention. It needs space to remember, and someone is willing to believe it still can. This didn't end with applause or headlines. It ended with roots, with water flowing again in dry gullies, with forests rising from forgotten stumps. Ethiopia didn't just survive its deserts, it rewrote them. No trees were planted, but thousands grew. No machines were needed, but entire landscapes moved. And now the world is watching a country that dared to believe in quiet solutions, in the power of patience, memory, and collective will. So the next time you hear the word desert, don't think of emptiness. Think of Ethiopia. Think of what's waiting just below the surface, ready to grow again.